Coppinger. Could we have order, please?
Thank you, Last Count Corla. I'd just like to start by sending full support from the Anti-Austerity Alliance to the secondary teachers today. But, Taoiseach, I don't feel I've any choice but to raise with you the disaster of the housing epidemic. All the signs are that the government's housing strategy is a bumbling disaster. Even if the myriad plans you have ever do emerge, it will take years for houses to actually be built. The top management in Dublin County Council have confirmed to me there will be no serious numbers of houses for at least 2 years. Fingal County Council, your own local authority, have a staggering figure of 38 new builds planned. 38. So the figures just don't stack up. In fact, you seem to be oblivious to a housing epidemic in your own area of Dublin 15 and Dublin West. We now have families in Dublin West becoming homeless for a second time, not just a first time. And not one new single council house is planned for the Greater Blanchardstown area, your constituency. So while the government is sweeping rough sleepers off the streets and putting them indoors, whole family homelessness is continuing unabated. And the mix is going to be added to now by a government crackdown by the banks to repossess homes, buy-to-lets and homeowners, with no protection for tenants in those properties. Now, since families can't expect a home anytime soon from your government, can you tell us what you're going to do in the meantime? The one tiny measure that you took to prevent homelessness was to set up a threshold emergency helpline, to negotiate rent supplement increases behind closed doors, which you could have allowed CWOs to do anyway, but they don't have any power to keep people in their homes for repossession or eviction. And interestingly, Minister, the threshold line is 47% calls from the North County Dublin area, which includes your constituency. So, Taoiseach, you and your department have to take major blame for the homeless crisis. You're relying on the private sector to house council tenants and those waiting on homes. Between you and your Fianna Fáil predecessors, you've cut rent supplement by 28%. The top-ups that most people we all know have to pay have gone up by 67%. That's through a combination of increasing the minimum amount a family must pay themselves and reducing the maximum rent limits. 67% more is what people were saying. Is it any wonder there's 1 million people on the breadline confirmed in surveys today? Now, Minister Burton, you actually stated in 2012 that there would be no incident of homelessness from rent supplement increases. You actually said they were a positive move. Obviously, you're not going to listen to the Anti-Austerity Alliance, to the housing action groups that are out there. But for how long are you going to stubbornly ignore what housing agencies are actually telling you from the front line? Focus Ireland and Threshold are both categorically saying rent supplement is one of the immediate causes of the sharp rise in family homelessness. They've called the rent limits in Dublin a fiction. Some of these people, by the way, are long-time, well-known members of the Labour Party, so would you not listen to them?
Thank you, Deputy.
So, Taoiseach, my question is this. While people wait for your illusory houses, will you at least agree to put a bandage on the haemorrhage of homelessness? Will you, number one, reverse the rent supplement cuts and revise the limits, especially in Dublin where the crisis is most acute? Will you stop dithering and introduce rent controls, which so obviously are needed and called for by all the agencies, and there's nothing unconstitutional about them? And will the government direct the banks to stop repossessions which result in evictions of families from their homes and instead agree to keep those families in their homes renting, which they'd like to do?
Sorry, and
if you don't do this, last sentence, Count Corla, if you don't agree to do this, would you agree that the next step is what county managers are calling modular housing, shanty towns, container homes and prefabs?
Well, social housing is a key priority for this government, and we have set out in the budget for 2015 and for the next 3 years an additional 2.2 billion in funding to actually provide social housing. In addition, as you may be aware, particularly from Dublin West, that housing construction has actually recommenced, and that will actually help huge numbers of people who are interested in buying a starter family home on an affordable mortgage basis to actually find a home, as opposed to what has been happening since the banking collapse, with many families in that situation being forced to rent and in a market where in recent times the rents have certainly increased very significantly, as we know from the various reports. But the £2.2 billion provision for social housing, which was committed to in the budget, is probably the most radical and the largest, certainly, investment in providing social and family homes for families who need to be housed, and it's a key priority of the Labour Party and of Fine Gael. And I have to say, given that sometime around 2000, and you have been a member of one of the local authorities in the Dublin area for a significant period of time, you would know that under the previous government, for reasons that have never been fully explored, the local authorities at that time basically stopped building social housing. We're now commencing a very ambitious social housing programme, and that social housing programme is going to see very significant provision of new housing units over the year. In addition, particularly in Dublin City Council, to a lesser extent in the other county councils in Dublin, in Cork and in Limerick, local authorities adopted the unfortunate practice of boarding up houses or apartments or flats whenever vacancies occurred. And there is now a crash programme underway which is bearing fruit as I speak to actually reopen those houses which in my view should never have been boarded up in the first place.
Please.
And that is going to add significantly to the supply over this year.
There's no points of order. Sorry, there's no points of order during the expression.
Because developers go through a housing plan. Housing plan written by developers, and that's what you gave to people.
Could we have order, please? Deputy, the Taoiseach to conclude now, please.
And let me say that we will have, through this investment, an enormous increase in the number of houses being made available. You spoke about the threshold protocol, which was established by my department in the middle of June. That protocol, as I'm sure you're aware, has worked really, really well, and it has actually meant that for families where a landlord has approached them with a threatened increase in the rent, which they may not be able to deal with, that using the combined offices of the DSP, Threshold or other housing associations, we are ensuring that those families are staying in their homes, and more importantly, Deputy, we are dealing with the cases and the families on a case-by-case basis.
And I want
to send a message out here. If a family has a difficulty where a landlord is increasing the rent and they're on rent supplement, I want them to use the protocol, because for those families who have used it, it has worked out reasonably well. And I think you should acknowledge the work of the staff in the DSP, in the homelessness units, and the staff in the voluntary organisations such as Threshold. That protocol is working and working well, and is being extended as well as we speak right around the country.
Thank you. Deputy Ruth Coppinger.
Taoiseach, it's absolutely amazing that the thrust of my question was about rent allowance and rent supplement, and you failed to mention the words even once in your answer. Even once. These are the things your department you have control over. You're the person in charge of rent supplement and imposing the rent limits, which are adding to the homeless crisis. And you didn't once answer my question, so I hope Cathaoirleach, she might be allowed more time to do that. Now, just on rent controls, you've been dithering around on this for a long time. We were told there was a proverbial committee looking into it. While the committee is looking into it, Taoiseach, would you agree that there isn't any other solution to preventing rents escalating in particularly Dublin and other cities at the moment? And with regard to threshold, and it isn't just myself, what Threshold is now having to do is print up the phone numbers of TDs from our websites and hand them to people that are coming to them for advice. That's what they're having to do. They're being sent to my door, but it's OK, I'm sending them to your door from now on. Just with regard to the point you made about house building, Taoiseach, I'd ask you to agree, please, today, to put housing down for a debate in this House, please. There hasn't actually been time set aside for us to question your figures. We would love to see houses being built. The problem is you're relying on PPPs, Part 5s and landlords in the main, and there's very few new builds coming on stream in any case. But even if they do, I asked you what's going to happen for the 2 years while we're waiting for them.
Thank you, Deputy.
Housing construction has restarted where in Dublin West? Could you tell us that? Nobody has seen a building worker or a crane in Dublin West for about 5 years. And you told one very untrue thing. I was on Fingal County Council for 11 years, but council house building has gone down since your government came into power. And I'll give you the figures right now. Actually, it was better under Fianna Fáil than it is under you. And you actually allowed less than 300 houses be built last year, and you allowed 500 council houses be sold off.
So
council housing stock has actually decreased under Labour. So if you really are confident about your figures, could you agree to table a debate where yourself and Minister Kelly will come in and show us where the houses are?
Thank you. Taoiseach.
Well, maybe then, as we're having an exchange of questions and views, Deputy, you might actually be able to explain why the people associated with your party voted against a social housing development before Christmas on the local authority that you were a member of. No, you might actually find out, because one of the issues is that parties like yours have to persuade your representatives on local authorities to be positive in relation to allowing social housing to go ahead and to be built. And I think that you should actually perhaps have a look at what the issues were and where those issues resolvable. I don't know what drove them to that, but it would be interesting to know. Secondly, you made a comment there about local authorities selling houses to council tenants. Now, there's a long-standing policy since 1973, which I understood was actually supported by most parties in this House, that people who had a long-term tenancy in a local authority house, at a certain point, maybe, if they apply to buy that house, that they would be in a position to do that. Now, I hear you condemning the right of people who live in local authority estates. By implication, you're condemning the local authorities for selling houses to tenants on a tenant purchase scheme. I think that you're wrong. I think that you're wrong. I think you're wrong in relation to that. And what's more, the newly appointed Fingal County Manager has brought forward, as the Deputy was referencing Fingal, the recently appointed Fingal County Manager has brought forward an extremely ambitious programme, starting with the identification of the sites and the areas, particularly in Swords, in the Swords area, and in the wider Blanchardstown and Dublin 15 area, where new social housing can be built.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
And I think that is an extremely positive development, which will result in many thousands of families getting the homes that they want and that from a social housing point of view, the rent supplement is an absolutely critical support to 75,000 individuals and families who are housed through the rent supplement. And as I said, the protocol which was established since last June is working extremely well on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Taoiseach. That concludes leaders' questions. So now we're going on to the next business, is the order of business. Sorry. When we have order, please.